So thank you all so much for being here with us today. I see a lot of us are still coming in. We're putting in where we're coming in from. So before we do anything, we just want to thank you all for being here with us today. My name is Michael Austin, and I work with the Early Childhood Investment Corporation. And I'm just going to go over a few notes really quickly before we get started. So number one, we're on Zoom. So a lot of us are probably experts at Zoom at this point. Just a few housekeeping things that we want to kind of go over. If we could, make sure that we are unmuted. So everyone, if we could remain unmute so that we can cut down any background noise throughout the conference, that would be extremely helpful. Just to kind of go over our flow for today, we're going to start off in this big group. So we'll all start off together where we'll do our introduction, our welcome. We have an amazing keynote speaker that we'll start off with, and then another presentation for the whole group following that. And then from there, we'll take a little break, and then we'll get into some of our breakout sessions and our concurrent sessions after that. So after this hour and a half together, you'll be placed back in the lobby. In the lobby, then you will select what breakout room you'd like to go into. So you should be able to read a little bit about the presentation, about the speaker, and then you'll be able to select which breakout rooms you'd like to go into. We're going to do that twice. So there's going to be 2 hours of concurrent breakout sessions, a lot of information, a lot of great presentations. So feel free to kind of read through those things and then select which ones you'd like to go into. With that, we also will be using Spanish translation in a couple of our sessions. And I'm wondering if I have either Marisol or Lisette that'd like to kind of speak as to how that will work for those that do speak Spanish that are joining us today.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Lisette.
Hey, thank you. So I'm a Spanish interpreter, and the Zoom has a feed. Oh, sorry. Well, do you want me to say this in English or Spanish?
So you can say it in Spanish and then I'll translate it.
Okay. So, para todos los que están aquí, va a haber intérpretes en español para las personas que hablan español, los asistentes que hablan español. Y en Zoom hay un botón donde uno puede seleccionar un canal, ya sea de inglés o español. En el momento en que vengan los presentadores y necesitamos utilizar este botón, pues les dejaríamos saber y ustedes cada uno se pondrían ya sea en el canal de español, donde en inglés no van a escuchar al presentador, sino que van a escuchar a la intérprete hablando. Y de esa manera, si ustedes cuando venga el momento de las preguntas, también si pueden hacer preguntas, no van a escuchar, ellos no van a escucharlos a ustedes, sino que van a escuchar a la intérprete. De esa manera es como funciona.
Thank you so much, Lisette. So essentially, there is a function that says interpretation on the bottom ribbon. For those that speak Spanish, you are welcome to click that and then select the Spanish channel. From there, it would either be Lisette or Marisol who will be translating live for us. So with that said, we're going to get right into it. So we're really excited to be here today. We know that your time is valuable, so like I said, we're going to get into it, but there's a couple of that we wanted to hit on first. So our friends with the Division of Child Development and Early Education in Carolina, they were able to offer $290 $100 stipends to families that are attending today. So those of you who are eligible to receive the stipend based on when you registered and then the age of your children, you've already received communication from us at the Early Childhood Investment Corporation. So please remember that you have to participate for the entire conference. So we're going to be together until 1 o'clock. So to receive the stipend, you have to stay until the very end. And then we're going to make sure that you just complete your payment form that will be sent to you, and there'll also be a survey sent to you on Monday. So you can look forward to those things. The sooner that you complete that payment form, the sooner that we can issue your stipend, and it usually takes about 5 to 6 days for that to get sent out. Lastly, for those of you that did not register on time to receive the $100 stipend, you still have the chance to receive one. there's going to be different options, or there's going to be different times for you to fill out evaluations at the end of your sessions. So fill out those surveys and evaluations at the end of the session, and then we're going to do raffles to draw names to do additional $100 stipends. So with that, we're really excited to spend this morning with you all. We have a lot of great presentations. You'll see things like equitable leadership that incorporates parents as partners, identifying and assessing your organization's capacity to work and engage with fathers, Advocacy 101. In the second hour of concurrent breakout sessions, there's a session called Tia Leah's Yoga. So that's something that's fun and engaging if you want your children to do a session as well. So that's one that we can get up and move around a little bit as well, but you'll also see a dad cafe, parent cafes, and additional sessions throughout the day. So with that, I am wondering if I can pass it over to our friend from North Carolina, Alexandria. Alexandria, are you with us? But just wanted to welcome you all again. So this is the first Family and Parent Leadership Conference in partnership with North Carolina's Division of Early Development and Early Education. So with that, there are over 600 parents that registered and signed up to be here with us today. And all that are here on this call, for the most part, are parents from North Carolina. So we're really excited to just talk about different leadership, different things around policy, advocacy, community leadership, resilient parenting. So thank you all, first off, for being here today. We have dynamic presenters and presentations set up. We also have amazing parent leaders that will be joining us here today. I'm going to just kind of skip through some of the points that are here on the PowerPoint, and then we'll pass it over to our keynote for today here in one moment. So we do want to take a moment to recognize some of our partners in North Carolina. So Dr. Christy Suggs is the Deputy Director of the Division of Child Development and Early Education with the Department of Health and Human Services. So we really do appreciate their help in putting this entire presentation together for us. And we're just going to kind of skip through a couple of these slides. And then Alexandria Morris is one of our other partners with North Carolina, who's helped all the behind the scenes work that's gone into putting this conference together, getting our presenters together. So we really do appreciate our partners. And I'm really excited to present to you all our keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Iheoma Iruka. Dr. Iheoma Iruka is a research professor within the Department of Public Policy at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the founding director of Equity Research Action Coalition with the FPG Child Development Institute. She has studied how to promote the health, wealth, and educational excellence of minoritized children and children from low-income households. Dr. Iruka's keynote today will talk and seek to uncover the importance of centering the multiple intelligences, expertise, and lived experience of families with young children. So reflecting on the Black Parent Voice Report on how the global pandemic is affecting Black families, experiences with racism and discrimination, their financial security, marital hardships, mental health, and early care and education options. This keynote seeks to uncover how early care and education systems and those who work alongside families and can create systems of opportunity. So you will learn how you can activate the 4 E's: exploration, expectation, education, and equipment to help transform the early care and education system to ensure justice for families and communities who have been historically marginalized, sidelined, and silenced. So we are really, really excited to have with us today Dr. Iheoma Iruka. So if we can all give a virtual welcome, and we will get into today's keynote.
Thank you so much, Michael. Greetings, everybody. Good morning. I know it's like 9:14. You probably got a kid hanging on you here and there. So thank you so much, Michael, for the introduction. And of course, sorry to miss Christy and Alexandra, but I just said Christy this week. So Christy, you might probably need some coffee, or it's all the process of getting in. But I just want to say to all the parents and everybody out there, just thank you for being here. And, you know, I'm going to be giving you a whole lot of adulations and a whole lot of like, yay. But I just want to say just thank you. So again, I am Iheoma Iruka, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And yes, I am at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I do a lot of work in early childhood education, children and families from prenatal through age 8, and really center a lot of my work on both my personal experiences, but also my research expertise. And so I'm just so glad to be here with you all. Before I get started, I just want to make sure that we're all grounded. So I want you all to take a moment, whatever you're doing, just take a couple of deep breaths, right? Because the work that you do every day as a parent, as a family member, as a caregiver, and when I use the word parents, I really mean it in a really expansive term, right? Because there's biological parents, there's, you know, step, there's adopted, there's community parents, who a lot of us are, there's bonus parents. So let's think of it in a really expansive way. That really says those who love and care for children on the deepest of levels. So take a moment and just take a deep breath. And also, I want to take this moment to also just take a time to honor Native lands. I want you to know that I'm right here in North Carolina with all of you. Of course, this is North Carolina's Family Leadership Conference, and I'm here in the Triangle area. And for those who know, the Triangle area is the land of the Lumbees that was taken through, you know, from white settlers. And so we need to acknowledge that we live, work, play, love, create wealth on the land that was stolen from the Lumbee tribe. And they're still here and activated, doing work for their community, for their tribal citizens. And so we need to recognize that they are a sovereign nation, and that we need to make sure that we open up our minds about whose land we are on and how it came to be, right? Because that's part of really engaging in family, is recognizing sometimes the trauma that is still being experienced, even if we don't see it, is still there. And I would also love to honor Black bodies in particular. We are in North Carolina, and we know that really only in my generation were Black people afforded the full rights as citizens. And so it's important that we also honor a lot of the buildings, a lot of the things that we see that was created through forced labor of Africans and their descendants and enslaved people. So, and we recognize that they're still with us in many ways, right? We know that Black people and other people of color are the ones who make our lives possible in many ways, right? They are our grocery folks. They are, you know, early care education, of course, nursing, just everything that makes our lives well. This is for Black people and for many other people of color as well, who work jobs that allow us to be sort of sane, right? So I want to make sure that I honor both Native lands, but also honor Black bodies, but also recognize that there's many communities like our Mexican sister and brothers, our Japanese sister and brothers, and you know, that really continue to suffer under a lot of inequities and oppression. So I want you all to know that I see you, and I really value all that you are doing today, but also all the things that our ancestors before us were doing, right? That is still unseen, that is still very invisible. So just thank you for allowing me to enter your space. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I do mean that if you drink coffee, I don't drink coffee because I don't need coffee, right? I'm just extra high energy. But if you drink coffee, get your tea, get your water, get your whatever y'all are drinking. So make sure I'm sharing my screen. Hold on, make sure I'm sharing my screen. But get whatever you need to be comfortable, because this is really about you. And so what I'm hoping to do is share with you just a little bit of how do we make sure that you all are pushing for what you all deserve and have earned. So before I really get started, which is why I want you to get your coffee, get your seatbelt on, is I use Malcolm X's words in many ways because he speaks to me, just like obviously also Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. They all, like all of our great leaders, speak to me and just their boldness and fighting for our families and fighting for our communities. And so I'm going to say this way. Speaking like this doesn't mean that I are anti-white, but it does mean that, you know, I anti-exploitation, anti-degradation, and anti-oppression. This is what, to me, is the fight for families to continue to do, right? Is that in all of our spaces, we have to continue to fight exploitation, oppression, and degradation. That is really the role that we should be thinking about. And it doesn't have to be this big, huge thing that you do, but it's literally in every one of your spaces, right? Even when you're talking with your kids, even when you're talking with your kids' teachers, even when you're out on the street at the grocery store, there are ways that we see degradation happening. What do we do to stop that? So this is my take home message, right? Because we're virtual, you know, I can't call you out. So if I was at, you know, in a public space with all y'all and I see somebody walking out, I'm like, wait a minute, you didn't get my take home message. So just in case, here is my take home message. And so basically this is the destination we're going to. So one is I want us to recognize that we're impacted by multiple adversities and trauma, but we also know that families are resilient. You are resilient. And I should say too, I'm not a fan of resilient all the time, right? Because what that means is that you're having to fight a lot of things. And that means that why should we? Why should we have all the speed bumps and roadblocks and poverty and racism and discrimination? And all, why do I have to be resilient? But I do want to recognize that even as I share things with you, that I recognize the resiliency in you, even if you don't see it yourself. The second point is I want us to recognize that families are central to children's development. I mean, look, I do a lot of work in early care education in programs like Head Start, childcare, et cetera. But I want us to really recognize, I want you and all of us to recognize, I'm a mother of 2 kids. And so I know me and my husband, but even my sister, my mother, his sister, his family, was central to our children's development, right? It's not saying that early care education or schools are not central, but we know that we are central. We are developing not just who they are, but who they think and how they feel. But we also know families are central to community development. If there's no families, I'm not sure what neighborhoods look like, right? We're also central to human rights, right? This is what I would push for all of us to think beyond. It's not just, yes, poverty, yes, racism, yes, biases, but I would say that we have to push for basic human rights. That means that as citizens of this union, or even as residents, as just people in this global world, we should expect certain human dignity. And so for me, we need to think about hashtag family-centered policies and programming. If you're not helping families, if you offer children, but you're not supporting and leveraging and centering families, then I'm not sure if you're really helping children, right? Because children just pop out and like, here you go, here's your child. And then there's no family that surrounds that child, right? And family, again, in an expansive term of what is family. Family doesn't have to all be biologically related. And then finally, family engagement and activation should consider, like, I want us to think through, how do you make sure that people are exploring who you are, that they're holding you to high expectations, but also you're holding them to high expectations, right? That you're being educated, not in a formal sense, like go get a BA, go get a PhD and MD, but is that we know the system and we know how it's working and not working for us and for you. And then we have to be fully equipped. And that's why I love that this conference is happening, right? I think it's the first time ever. And I lived in North Carolina for a while. And so we need to be equipped to be families and to focus, make sure that our policymakers, our leaderships, our administrators are literally centering families. So we have to be equipped with information, with advocacy tools. And so I think it's amazing that you're able to be in this space. And then finally, I said we must engage in richer actions, but that means that we have to really we have to really inquire about ourselves. What is our motivation? Why are we doing this? But what is our collective action? In the end of it, if I'm able to, do something for my child, that's great. But is that going to have a systemic reverberation? Probably not. So I think in many ways, we have to kind of go back to what I call sort of the African-centered ways of being, or even the indigenous way of being, is that we are a collective, right? We are all impacted by each other's actions, whether we want to or not. We are all connected, probably by 8 degrees of separation, I think as one scientist said. So we have to recognize that we have to inquire about what is our purpose, our value, and what is our contribution to humanity. That is the only way I would argue that we create an anti-racist and equitable system. Because if you are thinking just about yourself, then you're not going to be thinking about your neighbor who does not have the same, privileges. And so how do we create a collective network? And that's what it is. How do we as family members, as parents, create collective networks that holds each of us accountable, but also creates human dignity, especially for those who may not have access, resources, and supports. Now, just remember, we do have the translator. So Lizette, I know I talk a little fast, so I'm gonna monitor that. If you said something in the chat, I can't see because I can't see the chat at the same time. But when I get in my space, I just go. So I will be mindful though, that we do have translation happening as well. So that's my take-home message. So if you're like, okay, I'm good, this is the take-home message. So I wanted to sort of just shape this particular sort of talk with you all from, I do a lot of work, and one of the work I was doing is really around focus on families with babies, particularly Black families. And I'll tell you the reason why I focus on Black families, well, other than because I'm Black and I really am centered, but I feel like in many ways, Black people, Black skin, in many ways, in my point of view, is a reminder of the progress of America, but also the lack of progress in America. We literally are a reminder of the history of America, the promises that have not been delivered, but still the thriving of families. And so what I'm going to shape, with you all is I did this series of reports that really says, how do we make sure that we attend to families in the first 1,000 days? Is one of the most critical times when brain development is happening. A lot of synapses are connecting, neurons are happening, right? When children's language is being developed, their sense of self, their emotion regulation, their numeracy skills. There's a lot happening in that first 1,000 days. But that's also the time when you're not sleeping. If you're a mother of a baby, you're probably not sleeping. You're probably a little bit more angry. There's a lot. You're spending even way more money than you did before. So it's a time of a lot of joy, but also a lot of time of sleepless nights, probably, unless you have one of those babies. I did not have who sleeps through the night and you're able to get your 8 to 10 hours. I didn't have that. So I want us to recognize the power of the 1,000 days, but really the power of parents, both those who are birthing people, but also those who are really surrounding those birthing people. I also want to recognize that in many ways, our early care education, and I'll talk a little bit about each of these reports, but really high level, that we need to make sure that as we think about families, that we are centering the best of who they are, right? Like they are superhero families. Like if you are a Black family, a Latino family, an Asian family, a Native family, a Latina family, a family living in poverty, and you still find joy, you still are pushing forward, you are a superhero, right? I think we need to remember that many of our families are dealing with so much, but they continue to persist, right? They continue to push for their children, for their families, for their community. And so our job is to make sure, and your job in this leadership is to make sure that we are centering practice and policies with families at the forefront, right? That is not we're centering, again, I'm not trying to say teachers and educators don't matter. I'm not saying that people who don't have family or children don't matter, but I'm saying that it's important that we consider what does it take to support the best of children? It takes to support the best of families, right? So in this report, we sort of talk about, right, the dual pandemic, right? People talk about COVID-19, and COVID-19, which is still with us. If you're a parent or a family member of a child under the age of 5 who wants to get vaccinated, you can't, right? So there's families who are still really fearful of their child and their babies, catching COVID, and there's not really a lot of health interventions that could be, medicinal interventions that can be done. So we know COVID-19 is still having an impact on families, many families of color, many families living in poverty. But what I push for is that we have to recognize that before COVID-19, there's been other trauma happening, which is really racism, discrimination, and biases. And in this report, we begin to uproot that, yes, there's financial instabilities happening with Black families. There's a whole host of mental health because you're lonely. You're not doing the same things you're doing, like family reunions, churches, etc. So there's a lot that families are dealing with. And you couple that with racism, you couple that with a financial destruction, and that has implications on families' ability to be resilient. But they are being resilient, and that's the point of the report, is that they are being resilient, but did they need to be, right? Do we have to be resilient when we have never really addressed structural racism, right? The structure that says you don't get the same opportunities to have the best jobs, you don't get the same opportunity to have the best healthcare, right? So how do we make sure that families, especially families who have been minoritized, which includes our Black families, our Latina families, our Native families, our Asian families, and families who are living in economic destitution, how have we made sure that the system is working for them on the deep level and not sort of that performative, oh, we love you, but you don't address the issues of racism, which has been with us for 400 plus years, right? So that's what this report covers, that we need to do better. We need to do more. We can't ask families to continue to do more as the system continues to choke you off and says that your experiences don't matter. So this is what this report focuses on, and I'm happy to share more. Then the other part that I love to talk about often is that in many ways, we talk about the impact of racism. And if you don't, I actually encourage you to really understand what racism is. Let me go back real quick. For me, if we don't understand that impact of racism, of sexism, of classism, and any of those isms, because they're so pernicious, if we don't understand them, then as we're advocating for better practices, better systems and policies, if we don't see what it is and what it does, then we can advocate for things that actually continues to harm families on a systemic level. So I think we want to make sure we really unpack what is racism and how does it manifest itself in the families. And I'll talk a little bit about that just in a couple of seconds. But also I want us to recognize that there's cultural wealth that families have. Each of you have cultural wealth. And in this report, we talk about the cultural capital that families have, right? That includes things like your linguistic capital, right? And that, so for those who are maybe not English speakers, like our Spanish speakers, or those who may speak Cantonese or Chinese, and even those who speak African-American English, that's a linguistic capital that you have. And oftentimes we see that as a negative, but it is not. It is culturally grounded. Is the way that you connect with those who are part of your community, those who are part of your family. We cannot lose sight of the power of language in many ways. And language is not just verbal. It can also be the way you look at people, the way you communicate with your body. And we know that many families of color, Black families especially, communicate with their eyes, right? Like people talk about the parent who's like, when a child is misbehaving, they don't say anything. They just use their eyes. And that is communication. And that's cultural wealth. Think about social capital, like the things that you create because the system doesn't work for you, right? Do you have like your own sister group, your own brother group, right? Are there groups that you have formed because you recognize that, you know what, the system isn't working, whether it's your health system, whether it's your school system, right? That you create this sort of ad hoc group because you know you need to figure something out. You don't know the full answer, but you want to be able to figure this out. That's cultural wealth. And we have to recognize that because it's often unrecognized, but also unacknowledged. And so I want each and every one of you to think about, what are the things that I do that, I just do and I don't think twice about, right? So that's cultural capital. And there's many of those in this report. We talk about cultural capital, navigational capital, like being able to sort of figure out what your child or your community needs outside of the formalized system. And then finally, I talk about that if we're trying to really, really, really support our youngest babies and our families, we have to think from the lens of protection, promotion, and preservation, right? There's this thing we have called Maslow's hierarchy. It basically says that for you to reach this self-actualization, you can't just get there because you prayed on it. You gotta really first start with the basics. How safe are you, right? How much do you have? Do you have everything that you need? And once you have all that you need, eventually you can become the self-actualization person. And my theory for this is that we can't ask families to be the greatest and the best if, one, we're not protecting them from harm, from trauma, from material hardships. Like if you have to literally worry about food, about housing, about transportation, like how are you gonna tell me, oh, go read a book? I'm not saying don't read a book to your child, but I'm saying if my mother, has 7 kids, single mother, and I can't imagine, like she didn't read a book to me. I mean, I'm not saying that she wasn't a great, it did enrich our lives, but she had to think about the basic needs of how do I make sure that my kids can eat, that they have a home to live on, that they're safe and they're healthy, right? So we have to think about first protecting our families and our babies from just basic harm and even basic discrimination and racism and all of its manifestation. And then we have to think about how do we promote people's health and wealth and well-being and even access to early care education. So now is once I protect you, now I have to promote the best of who you are, right? And then once I do that, it's important that through all that, we preserve the best of who we are, right? Most instances, we're trying to make sure people are either act like white people or white normative, or we try to make sure that you speak in a particular way, you lose your accent, your kids go to this kind of school, your kids behave this way. And I argue, no. Our job as families, as parents, is to preserve who we are, the best of who we are, from the way our families may work, right? We may have aunties and uncles that are not biologically related. That is our family. They are meaningful to us, right? We may have different ways that we communicate, right? It could be our formal language. It could be our dialect. It could be the kind of ways we mix words together. But that's the way we communicate. So how do we preserve our heritage, our culture? The fact that some of us never use our first name, we always use our middle name or some name, right? Like that's just part of our community. So how do we preserve the best of ourselves and not try to sort of assimilate into something that is not us, right? And that's what this work does. And so I want us to understand that, this is a difficult time. It's not that it's the first time it's been difficult, to be honest. Of course, a global pandemic is not usual. We don't prepare for this, right? As parents, you don't prepare that your child's going to maybe be home, or that you may lose your job, or you may not be able to see your, go to church or see your friends and go to family reunions for a year or two, right? So that's not what we prepare for. What we have to know is that a lot of inequities were already always here. And COVID-19, the pandemic, just made it even more visible, right? So this is, as I'm a researcher, so I always have data on deck. But I wanted to understand that as you're fighting for what is best for families, what is best for your family or the families in your community, I wanted to understand where we are, right? And I'm going to show you a couple of data points. I see Magli has her hand up. So Magli, if it's a question,
it's actually a comment. I'm trying to help her with set up interpretation, but when we set it up, you can't hear anything in the Spanish end.
Michael or somebody from ECIC code, can you help, please? I don't want you to miss anything. Thank you, Magli, for unmuting and sharing.
Iheoma, we'll take care of it. I just clicked it, so it should be working now. She should be able to select the interpretation button. We apologize, everyone.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I wanted to kind of make sure that we have some data points, right? Because if you're going to I think if we're going to really make sure that we're family centered, we have to make sure that families are humanized. And that means that they should not have to be poor, living below poverty, facing food or housing insecurity, losing babies, losing mothers, not being housed secure. So I'm going to show you a couple of data points. And this is really more national data. And we know this data looks similarly even in North Carolina and across in other places, and even in Europe, and probably in different parts of North Carolina from the north to the east, the west, etc. So in essence, I'm just going to use Black families as kind of the anchor, but knowing that for other families of color, including our Native Americans, which we have a good population here, we didn't have that data because the data is too small, but they look a lot like Black families. So I'll walk through this really briefly. So basically, what you see here on the left-hand side is the light blue colors are Black families, the dark blue colors are Latina families, and then the red is our white families. And so I go through poverty. So I'll go through one of them each at a time. So basically this data point tells us that in 2020, about 20% of Black families were living in poverty. And that's compared to about, let's say 18% for our Latina Hispanic families, and then about 8% for our white families. And the similar pattern in terms of that stair step we see also for food insecurity. We did have about 13% of food insecure Black families, 10% for Hispanic families, and then less than 5% for white families. And so just on the mere point of, if you're poor, if you're living in poverty, and being in poverty, at least at the federal level, is about $24,000 for a family of four, which in some places that's ridiculous, right? Like it's like I'm making $30,000 and I still feel really poor. And that makes sense. And even some people who make more than that, but it's something just in terms of the federal guidelines. And when it comes to food insecurity, again, you see a pattern of Black families and Latina families are likely to have food insecurity. And let me just go to the right-hand side about home ownership. We do see that Black families and Latina families are less likely to be homeowners at a bigger level compared to our white families, which is about 3 out of 4 white families own homes. And it's important to note that homes is pretty much one way to gain wealth. And I'll talk about wealth in a second, but really we also have to pay attention to the issue of low birth weight, preterm, and maternal mortality. We do know that Black babies, as well as Native babies, are likely to be born low birth weight, which means that they're born with a lower birth weight, but also preterm, which is they're born before, so the gestational age. And those kind of things predisposes children to cognitive challenges, health challenges, and other kinds of sort of social challenges. Again, not saying that it's fatalistic, but we do know that your birth weight, but also your preterm delivery, also that you're at risk for things downstream. And then we know that the large number of Black mothers, but we also saw this number for our Native mothers or Native burden people who are likely to die either right during childbirth or right after. And so this number is one that we know is also high in North Carolina. Again, compare that to our Latina families who are less likely to have maternal mortality and also white mothers. But what we did see is during the early stages of the pandemic, there was actually an increase in Hispanic mothers likely to die during childbirth. So we need to continue to watch this number, especially as Latino communities their numbers are growing. And so I want to make sure that the issues of maternal mortality does not hit them as bad as it's hit Black mothers and Black birthing people, as well as Native birthing people. So to me, if we're going to push for sort of economic things, we need to also think about the health consequences that families are going to live under, as well as the housing insecurity. The issue of housing that I want us to understand is that having a house or a home that you own is one way of building wealth. And wealth is not the same as income. Wealth is the things that you sort of pass on through generations. It's almost like it's what you accumulate over the generations, right? So like, for example, I can't pass on my degree to my kid, but if I had sort of a home, I can pass that down, or I can take equity out of my home to pay for their college tuition so they don't have any student loans. If you have student loans, we know that that has reverberate effects on your credit. You can't buy a home, or you have this high underwater sort of mortgage. And so we know that having the home is really important for building wealth, at least one way of building wealth. And we see that Black and Latino families, Hispanic families are less likely to have wealth. For example, the median family wealth for Black people is about 17,000 and a little bit over 20,000 for Hispanic families. Compare that to actually now it's closer to 185,000 for white families. So that means if something was to happen, if you were to lose a job, and your what you have available is maybe $17,000, that may not cover you for even a few months, right? That may not cover all of your basic needs for a few months. But for other white families, they have access to a lot of wealth. And we see that growing bigger and bigger, especially because of the pandemic. And so I would argue, as you push for resources and services and policies, we cannot lose track of wealth is the one way that you can get humanity. Wealth is what you activate when you're sick, when you lose a loved one, when you want to switch jobs, when anything catastrophic happens. Your wealth is what protects you, is what keeps you safe, is what keeps you less stressed. And we need to remember, it's not just about going out of poverty, it's about generating wealth. I will argue this is the one way of humanizing families, is that we need to make sure that as you look at policies and programming, you ask, so is that this going to help our family generate wealth? Is it going to maintain our wealth, right? So these are things that I push us to ask for. And of course, I won't talk a lot about maternal mortality, but we know that when you lose a mother, right, or you lose somebody who just gave birth, that means there's a child that has lost a parent. That means it's probably destabilization in the family. There's a lot of trauma with that. And we know that North Carolina ranks number 30th, at least based on 2020 data, in terms of maternal mortality rates. And so we need to continue to make sure that we are not unnecessarily putting birthing people at risk. And last week was Black Maternal Health Week, and it's a recognition that we have to remember. But this is really something that we have to continue to push on, is how do we make sure that we are not sort of having this racial disparities in maternal mortality, especially as a developed country. Another one is the issue of segregation. And really segregation of people of color, especially Black people, in spaces that are harmful, like making sure that Black families and families who are living in poverty are not being placed in situations where they're going to be poisoned, literally. Either the water is being poisoned, their air has carcinogens. That has implications. So we need to think both about the economic piece, but also, are we making sure that our families are protected from sort of emissions, right? Because we know that many families of color, Black families even more particularly, but even our Native tribal communities, but even our Hispanic families are likely to live in high poverty neighborhoods. And when you're living in a high poverty neighborhood, it means they put all of the sort of industries that emit a lot of emissions that impact healthy development, they likely are going to place it there. So we have to make sure we're thinking about issues of climate justice as well as economic and social justice, because we know this is going to continue to be a big issue as climate change happens. And then finally, I want to sort of call attention to the issue of the disparities in expulsion and suspension for our young children. We continue to see the data come out where, particularly Black children, who make up about 20% of the preschool population, are making up about close to 50% of those who are suspended or expelled. This is a problem. And it's not because Black children are engaging in different behaviors than their white counterparts or other peers, is that somehow there's a level of hypervigilance that's happening with Black children in particular. We see a little bit of this also with our Native children. And we also see this with children who have disabilities. So we need to make sure that we are creating spaces that are not throwing children out or not engaging in harmful suspension, expulsion, or even seclusion, right? So if you have a child with disability, it is likely if you don't monitor it, that children are in seclusion. And we know that's not healthy for children to be in secluded spaces when you have a disability. So we need to make sure that we're also attending to the actual experiences of children. And that means that families have to advocate for children having access to high quality, but also that their experiences are humanizing and also affirming. And so with that, before I get into my 4 E's, I want us to really figure out and think through, what are the things to at least consider as you think about for families? What should you be advocating for? Again, advocate for what you think is really important. But I'm going to say it's also important to think about these high level pieces that I'm going to flag. It is important that we think about how do we make sure that children are healthy and parents are healthy, right? We know that health insurance, especially in the middle of a pandemic, is important. And while we've seen, obviously, with the Affordable Care Act, insurance access has increased, we know that even if you have insurance, this issue of copay and access to the right doctors and doctors that really hear your needs. So we have to think about, are we making sure that we have pediatricians and clinicians who really meet the healthy needs of your family as a whole unit? Thinking about both preconception and prenatal. When you have children being born low birth weight and preterm, or you have mothers die either before or right after birth, those are big issues and big impacts on families. So think about, are there programs or policies that you think is really important to ensure that children are healthy, that parents are healthy, that you're healthy? Second is, we cannot forget the importance of economic stability and upward mobility. If we look at the data population-wise, we do see the flat line between families being able to be upwardly mobile. Like, I know the social media would tell you otherwise, that there's all these billionaires and millionaires from TikTok, making money just because they're at home. Yes, there's some of those people, but we know for the most part, the majority of people are literally living on basic income. And so we have to think about, how do we make sure that our policies and our programming are really helping families to not just leave poverty? Because, for some families, if you leave poverty, it triggers you getting off of your SNAP, off of your housing voucher, off of your childcare subsidy. So we don't want to discourage people leaving, but we have to make sure that it's actually at a level that they can sustain and they can develop wealth, right? So again, thinking about issues of tax credit, minimum wage, income support, all these things. So think about, are there things that you are thinking about to ensure economic mobility, right? Because there's nothing worse. As somebody, I grew up in poverty in Boston, and I remember, I didn't think about it as a kid as much. I just remember I wore hand-me-down clothes, and a certain, there wasn't only 2 bedrooms there was 1 bedroom for 5 of us, etc. So I can imagine the impact of poverty, but it's also the stressors it had on my mother to have to make sure that her kids had everything. So we have to think about, how do we ensure economic stability and upward mobility, and how to make sure that families have what they need to be as stress-free as possible. And of course, how do we make sure that our children have access to early education, but quality, right? It's not just, oh, give me any kind of anything, but we have to make sure it's quality, whether it's in a home-based program, friend and family, neighbor, center, or school. We have to make sure that it's high quality. That means we have to make sure that it's also affordable, right? We have to also make sure that the workforce is treated well. We have to make sure that children are not being, unfairly disciplined and expelled. We have to make sure that children who speak a different language have access, right? If children have early intervention, that they can get those early intervention services and programs. So we have to make sure that all of this is possible. And then finally, I put in the box, possibly reparations, right? How do we think about the issue of reparations? Evie, I have your hands up.
Yes, hi, thank you. Dr. Iheoma, we're being asked by our interpreters if we could just have a moment for you to just slow down so that they are able to adequately translate. Love the energy though. They just need a moment for reflection. Thank you.
Thank you. No, and I remember saying that early and told you, when I get into my groove, But I'm almost done. So I'm almost done, interpreter. I just have my last big points I want to leave people with, because I'm seeing we're almost at the top of the time. So I want to leave you with the 4 E's and how you continue to activate your role in what you do as families and family advocates. One is, I want you to really explore, have people explore who you are, We can no longer sort of have people tell us who families are, tell us our worth, our assets. So make sure that you are able to have people explore the best of who you are, your role in your child's life, your centering of your own experiences in your child's life. So we need to make sure that you continue to push on exploration, that they ask the questions, that they also listen and activate what you share with them. The second part is by expectations, right? Many times, with families, we have just one direction, right? But I think it's really important that we as families hold our programs, our leaders, our policymakers accountable, right? We have to make sure that they're going to say, I'm going to get your vote, for example. We have to make sure that they have heard us and that everything that they're doing is centering our families, our voices, right? So we need to make sure that it's not about them holding us, accountable for children's, development and learning, but it's that we're holding them accountable for creating the condition for us to be families who are engaged in that space, engaged in that system. And then finally, we have to be educated in the whole system of whether it's early care education, whether it's about, rules about suspension, expulsion, right? We have to be educated in what makes it possible for us to be in this space. And I'm going to say, yes, it's going to take some time to understand some systems, but I implore you to connect with other families who either have been doing this work, who may have been engaged previously to really find out, what do I need to know about this early child system? What is quality exactly? How is it measured? What are the standards? What is the workforce credentials? We need to make sure that we are as informed as possible and that people give us the information so that we can actually understand it in the way that we need to understand it. If that means translating it, fine. If that means holding town halls, fine. But we need to make sure that they're providing the information so that we can make the best decision. And then finally, equipment. To me, equipment is really making sure that we have all that we need to be fully activated, right? In the end of it, do you need resources of funding? Do you need a website? Do you need a staff? Do you need a translator with you? Like, what do you need to make sure? Do you need time? Do you need one-on-one? Do you need resources? Like, what is it that you need to be fully activated, right, in the work of family advocacy, family engagement, at whatever space? And what are the potential barriers, right? So the more that we have what I consider the 4 E's, the more we can truly activate the power of family in many ways, right? And I'm going to leave with this particular sort of Dear Mama letter, because I feel like in many ways, I want us to recognize that I know being a parent, being a family is really hard, especially now, right? If you're a parent of a young child, if you're, parenting a young child, it's hard, right? Between social media, between jobs, between, the racial reckoning that's still happening, between any trauma that you've experienced, either in your family or in yourself. I think it's important that we continue to lean on each other, but to also give each other grace. So here's my Dear Mama letter to my own mother. And I hopefully you also take time to do your own Dear Mama letter, either to your own mother, community mother, those who you see as your pseudo mother. So here's my letter to my mom. Dear Mom, while as a 42-year-old mother of 2 in North Carolina, that'd be me, I have memories of my childhood that were filled with laughter, despair, fear, and just being. I look at my childhood in fondness, though I can see how people will probably look at it in pity because of the hand-me-down clothes, the Tuesday food bank bread, and the syrup sandwiches, but I don't care. I loved my childhood. Now in retrospect, I can only imagine how it felt to worry about how you would care for 7 girls, even as you were the warrior mom for those around you. From the kids you tutored, family gatherings you held about how to get a house or get into a competitive public or private school, becoming a public school teacher, like your third career, to suing the public school for injustices and inequities. While others call it foolish, I see that as bravery. I am fortunate to be your child. Your gift of voice to the voiceless, especially when no one is looking, is what I admire. If I can do a fifth of what you have done so far, then I know I have succeeded. So this is my Dear Mama letter, and I hope that you all sort of think about what is your Dear Mama letter. And as you do that, I want you to think about sort of this richer framework that says, I think it's important that as family advocates and family members, that we educate ourselves about our history, right? Because the history tells us our future. that we integrate with others, right? All those around us, from our mothers to our fathers, to our uncles, to all those around us, that we begin to integrate in deep, deep ways, that we're critically conscious about the trauma, historical trauma, about the privilege we have or don't have, right? If you have a home, that's a privilege. If you have food, that's a privilege. If you speak English, that's a privilege. If you're Christian, that's a privilege in this country. So how do we have humility in our privilege and activate our privilege? And how do we erase racism through our coalition and erase sexism, erase classism? Because you can't erase any of these systemic inequities if you're not building coalition. So I encourage you all to build your family coalition, to build your allyship, but most importantly, to think about a world, a community where we can be liberated and have freedom to be the best family members we can be. And so with that, I just say thank you to continue being resilient, to continue being family-centered, to continue thinking about sort of how do you explore your power, hold people to high expectations, educate yourself about the systems and programs, and be fully equipped to engage in actions, collective actions in many ways. So with that, I know I'm over time, but I'll pass it back to Michael, and just thank you all for all the work that you all are doing, because I know this is a difficult time.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Iheoma. That was beautiful. I know in the interest of time, there's so many thoughts probably. I see so much going on in the chat. I do want to open it up just for maybe one or two questions that you all may have. So feel free to throw it in the chat and we'll kind of go through that. But if there are any questions for Dr. Iheoma, we'll have a little bit of time for maybe one or two questions and then we'll transition from there. So if there are any, that will be welcomed. And then, like I said, we'll pick maybe one or two. And then if not, then we can keep going with our schedule for today.
Yes, and I just may say, yes, you can just follow me either at Iheoma Iruka. Also, and I hate to say this, but you can literally Google my name. I hate to say, I think I'm the only Iheoma Iruka in this country, if not the world.
You are the first one that comes up when I look for you. So definitely connect with Dr. Iruka, follow her on Twitter, yeah, connect. And one more time, can we give a virtual applause, thank you for Dr. Iheoma for joining us today. Thank you so much, thank you so much. And if there aren't any questions, I do want to circle back around to Alexandria Morris, who is now with us. Alexandria is our partner from North Carolina. Alexandria, are you with us right now?
Yes, good morning, Michael.
Good morning, good morning. Thank you for joining us. So I'm gonna pass it to you. If you'd like, I can share the presentation, and then would you like to go from there?
Yes, please.
Sounds good. Give me one moment.
I want to say good morning again to everyone. It's an honor to follow Dr. Iruka. I saw one comment early on where somebody is saying, I feel seen. I feel like you're talking about me. And that gives me chills, you know, that just tells me how much the words that she just shared have impacted you and inspired you all. And I hope that you continue to take the inspiration that she is offering through today. I love the 4 E's. I was taking notes. And so we're doing some of that today. I think we're really working on all of those E's, and I encourage you to continue to explore who you are, centering yourself in your child's learning, and continue to get educated about this early childhood system and how you can be impactful. So I just jumped right in. My name is Alexandra Morris. I'm the state level family engagement coordinator with the Division of Child Development and Early Education. And I'm so excited to see hundreds of people using their Saturday morning to learn more about how we as parents can impact early childhood education. I say we because I'm the parent of an exuberant 7-year-old child. So I'm in that space of sending my child back to school after we missed a kindergarten year, you know, because of COVID, and learning about how I can be engaged in her learning at her school too. So I feel very much aligned with you all in some of those some of the concerns and efforts to try to make sure that we are involved and make our voices known. Next slide, please. Dr. Christy Snuggs is the Deputy Director, and she's the director over the grant that is making our Family Leadership Conference today possible. She had trouble getting on in the morning, as did I, but I want to acknowledge her, and hopefully she'll be able to get on later to give us a closing. Next slide. And I'm going to give a little bit quick background about how we got here now, why we're having this conference. We want to build family leadership. And some of you may have been in our 2019 in-person conference down in Johnson County, in fall of 2019, back when in-person was just a thing we took for granted. And this is the outgrowth of that. So we've been planning this for 2 years, trying to find the time to make it happen. This is funded by a federal grant. It's an innovation grant called the Preschool Development Grant. And the idea is to strengthen North Carolina's early childhood education system and early childhood services in general across sectors. So I keep in mind that it's an innovation grant. To me, that's like the exciting part of this work. So we're trying to really get a little radical here when we're saying family engagement. What does that mean? It means more than just punch and cookies, where the families come one time to a classroom. We're talking about families as leaders. So one of the commitments of this grant is that families with young children do feel supported, are engaged in their children's early learning, and are connected to the resources that they need to do that. Next slide, please. So nothing about us without us. That is a strategy that has emerged since we began thinking about how to elevate family voice in our childhood systems back in 2019. We want to embed family voices. So not just invite as a guest and then, thanks for coming and never see you again, but something more sustained than that and more meaningful. So one thing that we heard and that we know is that the professionals who are at the decision-making tables need to be prepared to welcome family leaders in an authentic and ongoing way, with that two-way communication, really partnering and honoring the lived experience that's being brought. And that goes back to those 4 E's that Dr. Iruka mentioned, where it's like the expectation of holding our leaders accountable, making sure that they're hearing us and centering our experiences. And the other strategy is, back one more, is that parents and family leaders receive the opportunity to build leadership skills, learn about these early childhood systems, which can be a lot, but we're going to do it. We're going to take it piece by piece, and then have that support to feel more comfortable at those tables as change makers. So that's why we're here today. Next slide. A little more background. This work is growing out of, and when I say we, I'm talking about this Family Engagement and Leadership Coalition called FELC. Has over 100 members, and we've been meeting regularly since 2019, building the vision for this work. In our 2021 annual meeting, 27% of the participants were parents. So we take the parent leadership piece very seriously. We're gonna walk the talk. And our vision really is, again, that these birth to 5 childhood systems, and I stretch it up to birth to 8 too, because that's really still early childhood in my mind as a developmentalist, is that their systems are family-centered and equitable, serving children in the context of their families and communities. So again, that goes back to Dr. Iruka's explore, like, who are you and what's your role? How do you center your experiences of your child's learning so that when you go out as an advocate, you can make sure that you can express what the context is, so that, again, those leaders can be held accountable for those contexts. And then we want agencies to really align with each other in those learnings from adults in the child's life. Make sure that practitioners have the skills to keep that welcoming, open space at the table, that two-way, even the virtual table, that two-way communication to engage families as partners. And then again, that families are empowered to advocate, not just for yourselves, but for systems improvement. Like, let's think big, right? Next slide, please. We built a framework, a family engagement leadership framework. This is to really support, again, the providers and organizational leaders to understand some things about family engagement and leadership. So it defines those concepts in this document. We have 7 guiding principles, which really help ground us in what does family engagement and leadership look like. We have 4 conditions for success, which I really heard during Dr. Iruka's opening talk about being family-centered, equity-driven, collaborative, so that idea of being as informed as possible, and transparent, making sure we're getting the information in the way that we need it. We also have more systems components and opportunities for action, and getting really into action steps and what moves need to be made in terms of policy and process, and including parent voice and holding ourselves accountable. Just hot off the press this week also is an equity-centered family engagement resource, which I'm really, really pleased to be able to offer to you all as the first audience to it. And the link to that is going to be, it's in the Family Leadership Resources page that I made a Google page of. Oh, I was trying to give you the Google link. That's the title of it. I'll get the link up there in a moment, or maybe Michael can help me get the link there. And we also have a family engagement and leadership webpage where you can find this framework. Next slide, please. So my hopes for you today, and I think we're already well on our way. And I want to see at current count, we have 199 participants. That's amazing. So I hope that you all have an opportunity to feel connected with one another and with the speakers that you're hearing, and really inspired. I hope that you have an opportunity to learn something you didn't already know, to build your knowledge in some way, and perhaps learn some new skills, or get sparked to build skills that you already have and expand them out and use them in new ways. Find some opportunities to lead that you didn't know about. Again, this Google document that I'm going to get the right link to back up on the page. This has a lot of opportunities to get engaged. There's organizations like Moms Rising, Think Babies, North Carolina Child, NC Child. Those are advocacy organizations that exist in North Carolina. There's national level advocacy organizations. There's also information where you can learn more about this early childhood system that I talk about. And I want to be honest with you, sometimes it feels more like a hodgepodge than a system. I don't know, have you ever experienced that? If you're trying to navigate, find childcare for your family, find subsidy, find help for a child with special needs, it doesn't necessarily always feel like a system when you have 7 phone numbers that you have to try and call, or like 6 websites that you have to wade through. So we're trying to make it more systemic, and the more that we pull together to understand it and then reflect back what we need to make it feel like more of a system, I think the more it can be. And then finally, have fun. Oh, I said yes. There's somebody, I wish I could read the chats at the same time. I'm gonna not get distracted, but I want you to have fun. I want you to enjoy yourself today. Find those moments of levity. Do the yoga with me. I'm gonna be doing the kids yoga at lunchtime. So, and with that, I'll pass it over to our next speaker. Thank you so much again. And please contact me to become a member of this Family Engagement and Leadership Coalition. Thanks. And the next up is Melissa Little.
So I'll actually take it over. Thank you so much, Alexandra. If we could give one more virtual thank you, round of applause. So we appreciate you, and really appreciate you all for being here today. So actually next on our task list for today, we have another presenter. And then after this presenter, we'll take a quick break, and then we're going to get into our concurrent breakout sessions after that. So then you'll have the options to select which room you'd like to go in. I'm actually really excited about this next presenter. So up next, we have Dr. Karlin Tichenor, who's going to be talking to us for a little bit. Dr. Karlin Tichenor is a clinical scholar. As a researcher, he has investigated the Promoting Academic Success program for minority males. He has also worked with the First Schools Intervention, which is a project focusing on diminishing the ethnic and racial achievement gap between majority and minority youth through the development of partnerships between program staff, families, and schools. Additionally, he has performed as the director of the academic intergenerational program, mentoring program, Aim High, which I also participated in, through the City of Lansing and the Department of University Outreach and Engagement at Michigan State University. He has served as the coordinator of the Culturally Responsive Positive Behavior Intervention Support Initiative, the director of Student Support Specialist Program, the executive director and associate superintendent for the Lansing School District, a fixed-term assistant professor at Michigan State University in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies, and an adjunct professor at Siena Heights University in Mental Health Counseling Program. If we can give a warm virtual welcome for Dr. Karlin Tichenor.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. What a phenomenal presentation to start the morning off with Dr. Iruka. I actually met her, I feel like 15 years ago. She and I were doing some work with that project that Mikey mentioned, the Promoting Academic Success project, and she was in East Lansing visiting for that project. So great to see that the work has come full circle, and great to hear her presentation this morning. Such high energy and definitely a wealth of knowledge. I hope that you guys will listen to that recording and really take notes on what was shared, because I think it was really important and healthy to frame a lot of what is possible in the way that we think about the work as parents, as leaders, and as a community that supports ultimately the best interests of children. So I want to talk in my time this morning a little bit about this idea of complementing resilience and developing youth skills to increase their voice. What Dr. Iruka said this morning is really important. The idea of resilience being kind of a complicated term in the sense that we all have resilience, we all demonstrate resilience, and yet some individuals in our communities, especially those who are historically marginalized, have to have more resilience at times because of the increasing reality of barriers and systemic oppressions and oftentimes policies and practices that make it difficult for them to move beyond where they currently are situated and placed. And I want to just highlight that resilience is a significant aspect of our development, and yet many of us may have to have more resilience than others because of those variables. But I want to talk about resilience in a specific way. How do we complement resilience? And how do we do that in a way that develops youth skills to increase their voice? Before I do that, though, my orientation is always to really think about ways that we can connect. And so with that said, I want to just pause and slow us down just a little bit, and I'll sure be mindful of time, and just ask you to, if you're willing to take a moment to do some deep breathing with me. I think it's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it does allow our brains to connect to our bodies and allows our hearts to slow down, and we can really allow ourselves to be present. But it also allows us to be regulated ultimately. And I think as parents, as parent leaders, it's important for us to learn strategies that we can then teach our children and teach the organizations that support our children, so our kids can always be regulated in a way that allows them to process information, to think about things that may be challenging, and allow them to respond to the moment that the demand might require. And so I'll ask you if you're willing to close your eyes just for a couple of minutes, really probably shorter than that. And if you're not willing to close your eyes, just go ahead and put your eyes down to the floor or rest them somewhere comfortably. And I just want you to do this with me. Just take a series of deep breaths in to the count of 4 and out to the count of 6. Series of deep breaths in to the count of 4, out to the count of 6. And do it at your own pace, but just allow yourself to experience your breath, to be present, process the information you've heard so far today, allow it to integrate into your mind, allow it to develop maybe some new neural pathways where you can start to really explore what's possible, how you might change or reinforce some behaviors that you are doing based on what you now know and what you heard. How does it reinforce your passion, your commitment? Again, into the count of 4 and out to the count of 6, just noticing your breath and really engaging that breath. As I said, it is important for us to be mindful, be present, be engaged, and also translate how to do this effectively with the children we serve so that they can also be engaged and they can really have their prefrontal cortex really centered as they are hearing and learning new information. And this will be important as we talk a little bit today. So again, one more time, into the count of 4, out to the count of 6. And when you are done, I'll just ask you to come back to the room, opening your eyes if you have them closed, or just lifting up your head, and maybe just take a quick stretch break. Everything that I am sharing, even now, is something that I wanted to translate today. So be mindful that it might feel like we're just doing mindfulness, but it is an important strategy that I want to highlight today. So just a couple of centering ideas that are going to translate through this presentation as high points. This research suggests the need to support the development of resilience, especially for historically marginalized youth. And as I said, we all need resilience. We all have resilience. Even individuals who may make choices that are asocial to our communities are demonstrating resilience because they are working to survive. That resilience is a necessary part of our survival, right? And yet there are many individuals who might have to overcome more obstacles disproportionately than others in comparison. And that the narrative of this research really says that programs, organizations, and systems have to develop a focus on creating more resilience in youth to help them overcome these barriers. And I certainly do think that is important, that programs need to understand resilience. But again, my articulation today is that we have to learn to complement, not to necessarily build resilience, because the idea of building resilience implies that kids are not already demonstrating forms of resilience, especially those who are historically marginalized. They're always demonstrating resilience, even to get to school. Our job as community organizations is to build upon the pre-existing resilience that they have, rather than to think that we're responsible for teaching it. We have to reframe it and help them navigate and then apply it in really nuanced ways, which will come across in our presentation today. And then finally, we have to shift that narrative. We have to shift that narrative, and we'll do so hopefully a little bit today. So let's keep going. So here are just our objectives. By the end, we would have learned some of the narratives about youth resilience. We'll understand our opportunities to complement resilience, and then we'll talk about ways to increase youth voice, So what is resilience? So there is a commitment in North Carolina that babies, toddlers, and youth children across North Carolina will express, recognize, manage their emotions in healthy ways, especially under stress. I think that is important to highlight, that that is the commitment, that is desire, that is the goal for have all kids who are in North Carolina to be able to have these skills. But how do we build these skills? Well, first we have to understand what resilience is. What is resilience? And there are several definitions of resilience that I want to offer you, just so that we have a working understanding of these concepts, so that we can then begin to interrogate it and then maybe start to reframe it. The first definition here is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. The ability of a subject or object to spring back into shape is this form of elasticity, which we know our brains have and our bodies have in many cases, the ability to bounce back and respond to challenges and difficulty. Emotional resilience is leveraging adversity. The leveraging is a really important aspect here. How do you leverage an experience that you went through and then translate that to actually reinforce ultimate goals that you have for yourself? How do you bring in the experience and then redefine it so that it benefits and creates outcomes that you desire, right? It's about how we view and how we respond to situations. More on resilience, that it's the sense of competency, it's the optimism, it's the hope, it's the caring and respect for self and others. It's our ability to problem solve, cope, to reframe, to identify a sense of purpose. And all of these ideas are social emotional skills. And I recognize in many states across our country that social emotional skills has started to be something that policymakers have challenged, because it seems to integrate critical race theory into our ideas and our belief systems. And we're starting to teach kids things that others may not want kids to know. And I really want to reinforce this idea that social emotional skills are necessary in developing the important ideas, the perspectives, and the skill sets for kids to be able to move through life effectively and to do so in a way that allows them to stay whole. Okay? And so for us to push against these ideas that social emotional skills are not important or not needed is to fundamentally believe that kids don't need folks around them, parents, school teachers, and after school network organizations and youth serving organizations to support skill development in youth. I fundamentally disagree with that idea. And I hope that you are really thinking about these different narratives about social emotional learning and challenging them so that we can continue to support our youth so that they remain whole, so that they remain well, so that they remain safe. Developmental resilience really highlights the idea that that resilience is dynamic. It's generated through myriad of interactions, multiple systems, and it influences our biology, but it also is connected to our social, cultural backgrounds. Yes.
Can I pause for a quick second? Our interpretation went out, our Spanish interpretation went out. So we are, give us 1 minute to fix that and then we'll pick right back up. Is that okay?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your patience as we work through that. Sorry, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are just a couple more minutes and Michael will give us an update if we need to.
Okay, you're good to go, Dr. Karlin.
Thank you, thank you. So we'll move a little bit quickly because I certainly am mindful of all of your time today. And so how do we begin to translate resilience? So resilience can broadly be defined as essentially around this idea of capacity development, adaptation, and really reframing challenges that threaten our function and survival, and helping us to really translate that experience into fundamental skill. And I want to talk a little bit about that, again, with the recognition that resilience is a benefit to all of us, and yet some of us, communities, are often exposed to the need to be more resilient because of the conditions. But I do want to help us really reframe some of how we think about resilience so that we can understand that there are situations in our lives and the children's lives that we serve and our own children's lives that may create a condition where resilience
Yes,
has to
Lance.
show up. So for example, when we think about research around resilience, it highlights that there are a list of challenges, and on the left, you see the risk, right? You see examples such as trauma, neglect, adverse childhood experiences, which is ACEs, poverty, natural disaster, and war. That there are many risks that occur in the life cycle of an individual. As a result of that, the question becomes, how does that individual respond to those risks, right? And then so it becomes this question of, how are they doing in response to the risk? That's the criteria for adaptive success. That's that adaptation to the presence of a risk. Something happens, how do I respond? How do I adapt? What is in me that allows me to make a move forward despite the fact that something has happened? And so research, when it looks at resilience, it evaluates developmental tasks, mental health, physical health, work achievement, happiness, caregiving. What's important that as it also looks at the research, it moves to what are the process support success. And this is really what I want to highlight here, not to be too scientific, but to help us understand that there are risks, and then there are processes that respond to those risks, and there are promotive and protective factors that help individual children and youth be more resilient. What's important to note is that a lot of the research points to neurobiology. What's in the mind? What's a adaptation in the ability of the individual child in terms of their response to a risk? What do they do behaviorally? How does their family and relational aspects of their identity show up around them, their community, their cultural, their society? What's most important here is not immediately obvious, is that the parent, identified caregiver, is one of the single most important aspects of a child to develop skills around resilience. One of the single most important influences for a child to develop resilience and to develop the skills to be resilient, regardless of the risk. And so it's important for us to know and understand how significant we are as parents in responding to and supporting our children to respond to the presence of any risk that might occur. And maybe it's on the left, maybe it's none of these that are on the left. Maybe it's just challenges in general in daily life. So then how do we build emotional resilience? Well, one way is that we have to actually experience some forms of adversity, right? I mean, the idea is that we don't go through adverse childhood experiences because there's a list of significant moments in life that can really disrupt our neurobiology, our adaptive skill. But the idea is that we have some form of adversity. And sometimes as parents, because we love our kids so much, we find ourselves wanting to prevent them from having some experiences of adversity. Fact remains, we have to allow them to experience some forms of adversity so they can learn resilience. And then as they learn that resilience or they experience that adversity, we educate and we help them develop the skill. And so part of what I want to happen by the end of the day in this session is that you remember a couple of things. Number one, I teach skills. I, as a parent, am fundamentally responsible to teach skills. I teach skills. And in teaching skills, I have to be able to help my child and the organizations that serve my children understand that their role is also to teach skills, not to protect my kid from experiencing forms of adversity, especially those things that are fundamentally helpful for their growth, but to help them understand the meaning behind the adversity and the specific skill that is learned as I go through. So here are 3 ways that we might do that. We have to teach resiliency skills. We have to help our children become first aware that something is challenging, understand why something might be challenging, and understand how to develop a response to that challenge in a way that keeps them moving forward. And so it's conversation. It's saying that things are hard. This is why it is difficult. What can you do to persist, to move forward? What can you learn from that challenge? And how can you allow that challenge to become a fire starter for you to persist and move forward anyway? And then after they persist, talk about the experience of that persistence. The other thing that you can do is practice and rehearse scenarios. I think about this in the context of social development and actually cultural development in many cases. And it's really this idea that parents, especially parents of color, are often providing ethnic socialization, racial socialization. I think about my parents who taught me what to do if I were ever to be pulled over by a police officer. This idea that I need to be prepared for the possibility that I would go through duress and distress, and I need to be thinking about that in the context of scenarios so that I know what to do in that moment versus being surprised by the moment and reacting poorly, and then maybe something bad happening as a result. So the idea is that I practice and I rehearse scenarios that create opportunities for me to be prepared for challenges that might occur. So that in that moment, I can really apply what I've heard about, thought about before in ways that are supportive, helpful, and allow me to move through that challenge effectively. So as a parent, how might I practice and rehearse scenarios with my children to teach them forms of resilience before they might have to even go through a difficulty? And then the third one is to challenge them to do something difficult. Challenge them to do something difficult. The idea here is that we create scenarios where our children can literally be exposed to a challenging scenario and that we allow them to move through that, as I said in the previous slide, and then we process with them the experience of that challenge. This is an essential aspect of us being able to not only build resilience, but teach what resilience is and how our children can then develop resilience, or at least a knowledge of resilience, such that they can understand when it's happening and then know that they have full control over how they respond to any existing challenge in their own lives. But as we understand what resilience is and some of those skills that we might apply, the translation is really how do we complement the resilience, right? Because again, as I said earlier, and I'll restate, our children are demonstrating resilience all the time. Maybe not at the level that we wish they would, but they are being resilient because they're constantly trying to survive and move through their social spaces, their community spaces, their educational spaces, and generally trying to do it in the best way that they know how. They are being resilient. Our role as parents and the communities that serve children is to complement their resilience. And one way that I believe we do that is that we understand social emotional wellness in context. Social emotional wellness. So here are the ideas of social emotional wellness. That social emotional wellness really encompasses three primary ideas: wellness, social emotional learning, and mental health. What is wellness? So wellness is defined ultimately as a combination of social wellness, emotional wellness, cognitive, and physical. It's how we identify a well-developed sense of purpose, an ability to be reflective, how we manifest and maintain healthy relationships, how we show and demonstrate empathy, and then how we engage in our physical health, regular exercise, healthy eating, and adequate sleep. In the context of wellness, we have to understand that wellness exists across a continuum. And I really want to stop and pause and highlight this particular slide, because I think that when we talk about ideas of wellness, we often translate that to mental health and mental illness in particular, rather than really beginning to understand and recognize that all of us have mental health and all of us are working to be well. And if we can normalize this, then we can also translate the same knowledge to the children we serve, especially our children. And then we can help them see that sometimes your feelings and your emotions and your overall wellness changes. It changes from day to day, from week to week, from month to month, season to season, and sometimes across the year. And that any of us can be on the left side or the right side of this continuum. And that this continuum has neither bad or good, or right or wrong inside of it. It is just a fact that as a human, we move from left to right, right to left at any given moment in time, depending on the stressor in our lives. And we have many stressors. And if we can normalize these ideas with our children, then when they are in crisis, they can ask for help. When they're struggling, they can identify what they need in order to move to surviving. And when they're excelling, they can celebrate and identify, how did I get to excelling in this moment? And how can I stay here if I desire to? The key that I want us to think about is, as parents, as educators of children, as teachers of skills, we have to understand these ideas first. We then have to talk about these ideas openly and talk about them from a place of reflection. Where am I today? Am I surviving? If I'm surviving, a couple of questions I'll invite you to ask. Why am I not struggling if I'm surviving? Which means that I'm already implementing a set of skills to keep me from moving further to the left. And then after that, I might ask myself, what do I need from me to move from surviving to thriving? And then after that, I might say, what do I need from my community, the people around me who care about me, my parents, my family, my extended friends, right? So part of it is normalizing this discussion of wellness so that we can begin to create conditions where mental health is supported, social emotional learning is validated and reinforced, and that we are talking about challenges openly and honestly so that our kids can do the same. So here quickly, social emotional learning, as I've said already, encompasses pro-social skills and assets. It's the process which children and adults understand and manage our emotions. And there are a set of competencies that are provided in North Carolina that are supported by an organization based out of Chicago, and that is CASEL. And they highlight 5 specific competencies that I'll just talk about here briefly. And so what I wanted to do is give you an example of those competencies and then show you ways that other states have translated those competencies to mean the same, but are just conceptually identified differently. So self-awareness for CASEL, for example, is also seen as insight in the Department of Education in Indiana. But they both define them as the ability to know your emotions and how they affect your thoughts and actions. Self-management is identified as regulation. It is the ability to recognize and manage one's emotions. Relationship skills, collaboration, my ability to work well with others, including in the group and team environment. Social awareness, connection, my ability to have strong social awareness, my ability to see and understand and empathize with others. Responsible decision-making is also critical thinking. It's my ability to be constructive and make constructive choices, understand how I think, and then the strategies to enhance my learning. And then the Department of Education also added 2 in Indiana: mindset, right? My response and my ability to have cognitive flexibility. And then sensory motor integration. It's my ability to have body awareness and to know where I feel, what I feel in my body, and how I respond to stress physiologically, not limited just to my mind. And so then the idea of mental health shows up. It's an integral component of one's overall health, right? It's our social well-being. It affects our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And all of us have mental health. All of us have mental health. Our children have mental health, and we have to normalize that. And as we think about social emotional learning, we understand that social emotional learning is an ongoing process. Mental health is our well-being, and it cuts across our entire lifespan. And it shapes and moves depending on what we're exposed to and the skills that we have to respond to those stressors. All of it together is a holistic wellness focus. And holistic wellness becomes the outcome as we integrate social emotional learning, mental health, and general wellness together. That we are helping our kids develop a general wellness principle and identity as an outcome. So here are some ways that we can support resilience. And I think this list is maybe helpful for you to consider. We can ensure that children have caring, family-sensitive caregiving. This is nurturing family members that respond and support in those moments where stressors emerge, but prior to, we're teaching those skills so that kids are ready for challenges that may come. Close relationships and emotional security, predictability, the skill of our parents in our homes. Do we have skills to respond to the needs of our children in those moments? And if there is an absence of skill, how can we develop resources and connect to those resources so that we're developing those skills so that in those moments where our kids have a need, we can respond in a way that develops their skill. Agency and motivation to adapt. We can teach our kids how to continue to activate self-agency and then understand how to take an experience and shift it so that it allows you to use it as energy rather than something that becomes a deficit. We can teach problem-solving skills, self-regulation and emotional regulation. We can teach them how to self-identify who they are and then allow them to make choices based on those identities. We can have hope, faith, and optimism for their futures and for their current realities, and we can celebrate small and large wins. We can help them make meaning about their experiences. And then we can have predictability around routines and rituals so that they feel like the world around them is manageable. And then we can push them to the extent that we can based on their personality and their responses to the push in ways that help them identify and experience adversity, but then learn lessons about those adversities. And finally, I really want us to think about, as we understand social emotional learning, mental health, and wellness generally, and then we work on how we build and support resilience, build upon pre-existing resilience, we have to incorporate youth voice into that experience. And so part of our work is really creating space for them to be able to give voice to their experiences and then see themselves in the decision-making that we as the adults often do. When young people are lifted up, we all rise together. And so what does this mean? This means that we have to fundamentally, not just philosophically, we have to fundamentally engage youth in the processes, the practices, the policies, and the decisions that we make about youth. Earlier, we saw the illustration of nothing about us without us, and that was for parents. And I challenge us to shift that also to how we think about engaging kids. Nothing about them without them. And so how do I increase the voice of children as I work with them, not only as a parent, but as an organization that serves parents who support their own kids? How do we lift the voice of kids in that process? And that becomes an intellectual process, but also a process of intentionality for how we ask ourselves questions. How is the voice of kids in this process? How are we centering their voice in this process? What do we need to do differently in order to ensure that the voice of children and kids and youth and teenagers are centered in this process so that as we build these programs, as we build these resources, and as we teach them that we are giving them space and place to give us feedback and to hear from them about their experiences. That includes our role as parents. So here are some ways for us to think about how to increase youth voice in our home. We can give them choice and we can collaborate with them. And I know sometimes generationally, this is kind of antithetical to our beliefs around the role of parenting. I am a parent myself, and I'm an extended parent of many young people. And I believe that based on their development, the opportunity for choice is essential. It's actually a trauma-informed principle as well, that I give space for choice. Let me give you an example, and it's a small one. My wife has often had debates with my daughter about what she wears, and she might pick out and identify one specific set of clothing. In order to give our daughter choice, one thing that she can do instead is give her a set of 3 options that she agrees with as the parent, but that ultimately our daughter gets to choose from, where she's demonstrating self-efficacy and having choice in her experience of her day. We can expand that same idea and principle to other things, our policies, our practices. Here are some things we're thinking about. What do you think, right, as a parent? Here are some things we're thinking about for vacation. What are your thoughts about how you might do that? And then give them an opportunity to engage in collaboration with you as a parent for things that are low scale and something that they can learn with it. And then we have to promote and develop safety and trustworthiness. safety is not just physical safety, it's psychological, it's emotional safety, it's intellectual safety, and it is a space where kids feel that they are heard, understood, as I saw in the first keynote, folks saying that I feel seen, I feel heard. We have to create the same space for our children and not constantly assume that they are not developmentally able to understand what is going on around them, but instead understand that they're experiencing things all the time and that we have to work to create safety for them to be able to problem solve and think through what's happening and then develop words for their experiences. And in that, we develop trustworthiness. In that, we develop trustworthiness. And so understand our kids are experiencing things all the time. Let's be present and active in that process and ensure that as they experience it, they're developing skills as we support them to do so. The skill is awareness. The skill is also application and then understanding what did I learn from what just happened. And then as we move, we can also hold the organizations that support youth accountable to the same. And so here's some list of items that we can help our organizations that support youth do to ensure that student voice, youth voice is centered in the process. Here are a couple of ideas. Provide young people with information, training, and support so that they can succeed. Include young people in meetings so that they understand what's going on and that they have an opportunity to give voice and to have choice. And then ensure that as individual youth are learning and developing, that in that their voice and their choice is lifted up and that we actually make decisions based on what we heard from them. Don't just hear from them and then disregard the information, but instead hear from them and apply what we've heard so that they have experiences that they feel included in, so that they feel like they have choice, so that they ultimately develop some skills that help them navigate and advocate for themselves moving forward. So with sake of time, I'm going to close out and just acknowledge that at this point, we have an understanding of what resilience is and that our job is not to just build up resilience, but to understand that we're building on pre-existing resilience and that we're doing so by complementing resilience and helping the youth that we serve and the children in our homes develop an understanding of what the adversity is and understand the skill that's learned from that adversity so they can apply that skill into other spaces and challenges that they may have. And then we have to ensure that in their experience, that we're increasing their voice and that we're holding the organizations accountable to increase their voice so that our kids can develop holistically their ability to engage with their lives actively, not passively, and that they understand that they have the ability to transition and to challenge and to advocate for what they need, even in their homes with us, so that that extends into how they behave and respond to the world around them. Thanks for having me. I'll conclude the presentation at this time.
We give another warm virtual thank you to Dr. Karlin Tichenor. Dr. Karlin, where can we connect with you at? Are you on social media? I know there's a lot of people that really enjoyed that presentation, so I want to give the opportunity for them to connect with you. So it looks like you put it in the chat at Dr. Karlin J. Again, we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate you taking the space to really share all that you were able to cover. And I want to thank you all for joining us today.